We have lived through incredibly big sort of political transformations. We've gone through a 10-year civil war. We want our history to be accounted for as well. And I remember running around on the streets with my camera as this young photographer and really sort of through photography in some way participating in that moment. Movement here was quite brutal, and there was a lot of repression from the army and the government, of course, and women were out on the streets as alongside men, and of course I didn't see too many women photographers on the streets then. Nepal Picture Library attempts to do is really to sort of try to create a more inclusive historical account. Acts of feminism isn't just in like the very brave stories or that daily resistance is what we often don't see. So to create visibility around some of these things, and just also to bring attention to sort of relationships, let's say, and relationships within kinship networks, but relationships outside kinship networks. The work that we're doing at Nepal Picture Library, especially in its early years, and for sure some of the projects in the more recent years, for me they feel like a very direct response of sort of this generational time here in Nepal, where we have lived through incredibly big sort of political transformations. We've gone through a 10-year civil war from 1996 to 2006, which was exactly when I came back home. So for me personally also, it was this really kind of euphoric re-entry back home, and an engagement with sort of life here, political life, social life, cultural life here. Nepal Picture Library attempts to do is really to sort of try to create a more inclusive historical account of Nepali society as well. And so we are not only, thinking about sort of inclusion for the future, but also really trying to have some kind of a redressal of history almost, to say that, there was a much bigger history here, not only of the monarchs, but marginalized groups in all sort of areas of society. Every time we put the work out in public spaces, it becomes also, of course, a way to disseminate, but also a way to feed, like a collection drive for the archive also, because each time we disseminate, people walk up to the exhibits to say, hey, we have histories too, we have material too, we want our history to be accounted for as well. And so it does become this dialogic, this kind of cyclic process. It's something that we really enjoy and value. This referential, this like referral method, women
identifying other women pointing us to other women and groups of women who have done this or that, this kind of visibilizing of this sisterhood, or like this kind of network has been a huge part of the process for us. And I think recently we showed the work in a museum space, in an art sort of biennale context, and I think it was a reminder that we do feel that the work actually does not belong in these spaces, and that the public sphere is really where it belongs. And so I think it was a good reminder.
For me, that is when, the big Jan Andolan 2 happened here in Nepal, which was the second people's movement, which eventually did topple the monarchy. And I remember running around on the streets with my camera as this young photographer, and really sort of, through photography in some way, participating in that moment. And I was so interested just to talk to people and interview people, to just say who are you and how come you're here and what brings you here to the streets. There was this 22 or was it 23 day sort of big movement here. It was quite, brutal, and there was a lot of repression from the army and the government, of course, and women were out on the streets as alongside men, and of course I didn't see too many women photographers on the streets then. I mean, that was quite stark, and maybe I do feel that deep down inside that was also one of the reasons why, I felt one needs community here, and that was also the early impulses of trying to create community in a more formal way through Photo Circle. When we initiated the Feminist Memory Project, it was also, again, a particular time. The Me Too movement had just sort of erupted, and we were all thinking about gender and power and patriarchy. And so I think that was the initial impulse that looked at women's experiences of feminism, diverse experiences of feminism, and women's experiences of living public lives outside sort of just the confines of domesticity. And women being thinkers and writers and, people who shape public opinion, people who were making very real contributions to political change, and to really this project of educating ourselves in this modern world. And really was responding to a particular global moment, but really wanting to understand and collate and bring together Nepali histories with women really at the center of them. We started this project with a sort of reading seminar, and we were really thinking about what is memory, the problematics of memory work also, what is memory versus history, what is mainstream history work versus public history work. And so in a way we were sort of creating this space for ourselves to learn and reflect and think, to think about how we wanted to shape this project. And initially we started out by thinking of themes. There were thematic threads that were emerging. through the seminar discussions. But then parallelly, we were also beginning to develop a sort of database, just lists really, of women's names, some of which we started on our own accord, and some of which were provided to us as we started to speak to women. And that list just started growing, and the themes began to emerge from these lists also, and the lives that these women had led. And so some of these key themes around political participation, around education, around sort of writing, that women were doing, around the collective work that women had begun to do, the NGOs that had begun to be formed, the solidarity work that women were doing. So I think that's how the themes began to emerge. Parijat was this incredible, one of the most well-known Nepali writers, who was really this very, very sort of seminal figure in Nepali sort of literature, who was in that photograph sort of giving a lecture in a village somewhere. And it is a very striking photograph. She's kind of at the center. She's sitting on a chair, I think. And then she's just surrounded by this sea of men who are all sitting on the ground and listening to her. There are many, many sort of iconic moments like this. I think that to give you this insight, that actually women have been, doing many things in their own way, some quietly, some in more public ways, for a very long time. And so how to just, create a register, create a sort of index of these experiences and moments in time. We've tried to really think of ways to do this work even without only canonizing certain women, which seems to happen so often when you're doing women's history work. And so it's really sort of, I think, this indexical quality that we're trying to foreground in the archive. These stories that we're trying to tell, of an underground, life that somebody has lived as a letter carrier, perhaps, for political, campaigns, or as a campaigner for a certain political party, let's say. We have somebody in the archive who was a campaigner actively for over 30 years of her life, and she just traveled from east to west Nepal campaigning, She didn't make it very high up in the ranks of the party, but she was definitely one of these foot soldiers who, I think created the base for the party that it has today, and so on. We've also really tried to sort of look at the mundane, as you were saying earlier, and moments of friendship, moments of sisterhood, family sort of dynamics. There were women who couldn't raise their children as they would have perhaps because they were part of certain political campaigns or other projects, and strains in relationships within families. And so really trying to look at sort of these nuances of the lives that these women were living and choices that they were making. I think of course, the story is really at the forefront, and the text is very important in this work. The annotations that happen, of course, these are there is a strong layer of subjectivity that we are bringing to this work also, given our own politics and our own interests. The whole idea of publicness, and what it meant to live public lives for women at particular times, and how they chose to do that. and what kind of strategies they were relying on. Some conscious, some maybe very much in the subconscious also. I mean, I think, quite early on when we were doing this work here, trying to sort of build resources for ourselves, we were very fortunate to find friendship and support in Dhaka through Shahidul Alam, who is the magnanimous person that he is, and through an entire community there at Pathshala, the photography school that they run, and Drake and Chobimela, the festival. And we used to go to Chobimela every 2 years. It was like our little pilgrimage in the region, and I think for me, that was very special to be able to find so much to learn from, and so many doors that community opened for us. And so I think working regionally for us has just been sort of quite a natural thing right from the beginning, because I think when we set up in 2006 or 7, it was, we received that kind of a leg up, from this community in Dhaka. Who knew that we could find it in Dhaka, Quite recently in Kochi, we ran a workshop, and it was really interesting because it just, it wasn't meant to be that way, but it somehow turned out to be that it became a gathering of people who were all working on counter history projects in different parts of India, like northern Kerala, Kashmir, but like 3 different groups from Kashmir who somehow didn't know each other, and Guwahati, and other parts of Assam. Actually, there were 2 groups from Assam. And it was, this kept coming up in conversation, and we realized how, I think there was a certain kind of sharing that was happening because we were outside of sort of the main power centers. How is intentional solidarity building possible across, issues, across generations? How can, feminists be more supportive of the Dalit movement? How can people who are working in more sort of indigenous knowledge production work with more women who are working in more feminist spaces, and so on and so forth? Some of this intersectionality that we talk about, but how to make it possible and real, and not just sort of ticking off of boxes, and how to forge some of these actual relationships and understandings, and how to make coming together possible, more enjoyable.